is made queer, no need to fear. Stay tuned, your mind expands today. Summa made simple, learn in a fun way.
In this episode of Summa Made Simple, we shall consider the fourth and the fifth articles under the topic of vainglory. Vainglory is a vice which St. Thomas covers in 5 articles, so he gives it a little bit more of extensive treatment than he did some of the other vices against magnanimity, because it's such a big topic. It really is such a big topic. And in the interests of time, I'm going to combine the fourth and the fifth article together. And the fourth article asks the question whether vainglory is a capital vice. The reason why this is of interest, or should be of interest to the man on the street, is because in this article, St. Thomas touches on an idea which I've come across in some of the writings of other saints, and it's one that gives a lot of hope, especially with respect to vices, temptations, defects, sins, because it alludes to the idea that when we are tempted in one direction, or when we feel a lot of temptation or weakness in a certain aspect of our lives, that actually implies in a weird way that we have the potential to be really, really good or strong or fantastic in that area. Like, it's almost like the material is there for us to be really great in that area. But okay, let's get into the point so that you understand what I'm talking about. Whether vainglory is a capital vice, this is the fourth article in question 132, which has to do with vainglory. I'm going to skip over the objections and go straight to the main body of the article. I answer that, on the contrary, Gregory in Moralia 31 numbers vainglory among the 7 capital vices. So this idea of the 7 capital vices, just to give you a context, it's a teaching in Christianity that there are 7 capital sins or capital vices. What does that mean? That means that these sins cause so many other sins to come out of them. They're like a catalyst for a lot of other sins, defects, weaknesses, vices, etc. So that's why they're called the capital ones. They're like heads, and then the others are like members belonging to that body. And traditionally, they've always been the following 7. See if I get them right: pride, lust, sloth or laziness, anger, avarice or greed, gluttony, and envy. Yeah, those 7. So that's a traditional numbering. But here's the thing. This is not like a dogma. It's not something which, people will say in the creed. It's not something that's divinely revealed through sacred scripture. It's something which is a fruit of theology. So theologians over the centuries have talked and discussed this issue amongst themselves and have come to this listing, which means that there are actually alternate listings of these 7 capital sins. So the theologians haven't always agreed on what the 7 are. So sometimes there have been others which have been left out of lists, others which have been combined together, etc. And this is what St. Thomas alludes to when he gives this answer. Gregory numbers vainglory among the 7 capital vices. I answer that the capital vices are enumerated in 2 ways. For some, reckon pride as one of their number, and these do not place vainglory among the capital vices. Gregory, however, reckons pride to be the queen of all the vices, and vainglory, which is the immediate offspring of pride, he reckons to be a capital vice, and not without reason. For pride, as we shall state further on, denotes inordinate desire of excellence. But whatever good one may desire, one desires a certain perfection and excellence therefrom. Wherefore, the end of every vice is directed to the end of pride, so that this vice seems to exercise a kind of causality among the other vices, and ought not to be reckoned among the special sources of vice known as the capital vices. I'll stop there and try and give some explanation of what St. Thomas is saying. The first thing which really stood out for me when I was reading this is that, the Summa is a big book. The Summa is really a big book. But when I read this, and then St. Thomas says, pride, as we shall state farther on, denotes inordinate desire of excellence. What that implies to me is that St. Thomas had actually either written out, basically what we're reading of the Summa right now is either a second or a third draft of the thing, or he had meticulously outlined the whole thing or major chunks of it by the time he was like dictating this, because he wrote by dictation to scribes. They say that he'd dictate to 2 or 3 scribes at the same time, different parts of the Summa. And wow. Yeah. Anyway. But the point is that for me, what really struck out was that he had thought that far ahead in terms of pride and what the definition of pride is and where he's going to discuss it in the bigger body of his work. And he's going to discuss it under the virtue of temperance, which is what we'll get to once we finish fortitude. That's the first thing that stood out for me. Second thing that stood out for me is what I alluded to right at the beginning about this idea. He says, whatever pride denotes inordinate desire of excellence. Whatever good one may desire, one desires a certain perfection and excellence therefrom. Wherefore the end of every vice is directed to the end of pride. You know, it's moments like these when I wish this was like a video and I had like a whiteboard so that we can connect some of these concepts together, because what he's saying here is really profound, but I'll try and just explain it through audio. Try and follow me with your imagination. So remember, first he said, pride denotes inordinate desire of excellence. So let's park that definition for a second. Keep it in our minds. Pride denotes an inordinate desire of excellence. Then he goes on to say, whatever good one may desire, one desires a certain perfection and excellence therefrom. So that makes sense. So let's say, for instance, I desire the good of food. The perfection and excellence I desire from that is, you know, my body being nourished, my body being repaired, or if I desire sleep, the good or the perfect or the excellence from the perfection or excellence from sleep is my body being well rested and my energy being replenished. Or if I desire the good of sex, the perfection and excellence therefrom is that of my genes, my gene pool being perpetuated down through the ages and down through the centuries. So any good one may desire, one desires a certain perfection and excellence therefrom. Wherefore, this is a clincher, wherefore the end of every vice is directed to the end of pride. Do you understand that? Remember, he said pride is the inordinate desire of excellence. And he's saying, whatever good one may desire, we desire a certain perfection and excellence from it. Wherefore, or as a result, the end of every vice is directed to the inordinate desire of excellence. That blew me away. Because what does this mean? What does this mean? This means that every single human, every vice is directed towards something which in and of itself is perfect and excellent in a certain way. The problem is that the vice is the disordered or inordinate desire for that good thing. And that is, you know, what that means is okay, let me try and give an analogy. So we're coming here to a concept in philosophy of matter and form. Let me try and explain it this way. Everything which God creates is good. This is something which you have from Genesis. Everything God created is good. Whether it is food, whether it is sleep, whether it is sex, everything God created is good in and of itself at the material level. That's what I mean by in and of itself. Now, human beings are called to complete creation by giving it form. Let me give you an example. So let's say, for instance, I've got 3 sculptures in front of me, right? One is a sculpture of Bugs Bunny that is made out of silver. The other is a sculpture of Bugs Bunny that's made out of iron. And the other is a sculpture of Bugs Bunny that is made out of gold. Solid gold, solid silver, solid iron. These are 3 different materials, but the form is exactly the same. They're exact replicas of Bugs Bunny, right? But the material is different. What gave that lump of a lump of iron or silver or gold that form of Bugs Bunny? It was the artist, right? The maker. He had this idea in his mind of something he wanted to achieve, a form he wanted to put on that matter. And so in a sense, he kind of completed that creation, because at the end of the day, it was just a lump of iron and it wasn't anything. So he gave it the form of that statue of Bugs Bunny. So formally, these three statues are the same, formally. Materially, they are different. So coming back to the things God has created, God creates all of these good things, right? And then human beings have to complete that creation by giving it shape and giving it a form. This is what virtues are all about. Virtue is all about giving the form of goodness, which means something that has been reasoned in terms of thinking, what is the end of this thing that I want to achieve? Applying that to different matter. So whenever we give matter the form which God intended it to have at the beginning, because God said, okay, I'll create the matter, but I'll let you put the form on it out of human freedom, I want you to complete creation, then that's when you get things which are virtuous, actions which are virtuous, or actions which are vicious. So human beings actually occupy a very special place in creation, and God's given us tremendous, tremendous power. So for instance, if you look at something like food, God wanted it to be for, in and of itself, it's a good thing. God wanted it to be for nourishment, right? But a human being can say, okay, I'm going to align to God's plan in terms of giving this food the end or the purpose or the shape of nourishment, or it's just going to be for my own enjoyment and pleasure and gluttony. He's got that choice. He can make or destroy creation in that way. Or sex. God's given sex for the purpose of the perpetuation of mankind, because if sex just disappeared off the planet Earth, so would the human race. And then if a human being says, okay, so what I want to do is I want to use sex for the purpose which God has created it, which is to create strong families, strong communities, strong societies that can just keep on going for centuries and centuries and centuries in a strong and stable way. He can do that, which means is conforming that material thing to the eternal design of its first creator. So he's applying that shape to it. Or he can say, oh, I'm just going to have a good time. I'm just going to rock out and enjoy myself. And he can end up destroying a lot of hearts, a lot of families, a lot of communities, a lot of bonds. So that's the thing about matter and form, which I'm trying to explain here. So when a person... So going back to the analogy of the, silver, gold, and iron and Bugs Bunny, when a person can take gold and work it into a statue of Bugs Bunny, that means he can also take that same gold and work it into a dagger, which can stab someone and kill the person, right? But that means that that person has the ability to shape gold into whatever he wants. He has an extraordinary skill. And this is what I meant when I said at the beginning that when a person suffers from a particular vice, temptation, weakness, defect, it means in and of themselves they have the ability to take that matter which they're messing up and shape it into something. In other words, they're pretty experienced with that matter. They know how to, they have the ability to shape it. They're like a master craftsman who can shape this thing into whatever they want. And this I came across first in the writings of St. Philip Neri. St. Philip Neri, let me just grab this quote because, I don't know it by heart. I just know where to find it. St. Philip Neri, the laughing saint, a saint with a very good sense of humor. He said this, "Do not grieve over the temptations you suffer. When the Lord intends to bestow a particular virtue on us, he often permits us first to be tempted by the opposite vice. Therefore, look upon every temptation as an invitation to grow in a particular virtue and a promise by God that you will be successful if only you stand fast." Those are words full of hope. So if you're listening to this and you battle with a specific predominant vice, predominant defect, that means, so for instance, amongst men, it's very, very common for them to battle with lust. If you really suffer from lust or pornography addiction or anything like that, just know that within you, you have the potential to be one of the most chaste people like in the world. You've got that thing in you. That's what this whole thing around form and matter and what God's created and how we shape it and what we put on the things that God has created. That's how all these ideas fit in, and that's why that for me was what really stood out from this idea of whether vainglory is a sin, which is that every vice at the end of the day is seeking something good. Running out of time, moving quickly to the next article, fifth article, because in the previous article we said vainglory is a capital vice. a capital sin, although in a later enumeration it was combined with pride. But that's not like a dogma, right? You can number them however you want. But the fifth article is whether the daughters of vainglory are suitably reckoned to be disobedience, boastfulness, hypocrisy, contention, obstinacy, discord, and love of novelties. Why this question is important is because whenever we try to grow in, once you set out on the path of saying, okay, I want to grow in virtue, I want to become a virtuous human being so that I can be happy in this life and in the next. The first thing you have to do, of course, you have to pray. That just goes without saying. But a first step is you have to set out on a course of study to know and understand what the different virtues are, which is why St. Thomas Aquinas spent so much time and effort and years writing over 1 million words, which is about the word count of the Summa, about the virtues. Well, it's not entirely about the virtues, but a big chunk of it is about the virtues. It's very difficult to grow in humility if you don't know what humility is. It's very difficult to avoid pride, which is how to grow in humility, if you don't know what pride is and what its manifestations are and what to look out for. You cannot battle an enemy if you don't know who that enemy is or where they are, what their tactics are. That's why this question is important, because it just breaks down the different phases of vainglory, what vainglory looks like. And it gives some beautiful definitions, again, of terms which we normally take for granted in our day-to-day parlance. We've never bothered to define them. But St. Thomas here defines each of them. And the definitions for me were quite eye-opening. Because I had never realized that a lot of these defects actually stem from vainglory. And I was like, wow, okay, Fidel, there's something you've learned about yourself today. Okay, before I do a public confession on a podcast, let me just read the points. On the contrary, the objections say that no, that enumeration which I read in the title of the question is wrong. And then St. Thomas says, on the contrary, stands the authority of Gregory in Moralia 31, who there assigns the above daughters of vainglory, meaning disobedience, boastfulness, hypocrisy, contention, obstinacy, discord, and love of novelties. So he's going to explain how each of these is a result of vainglory. I answer that the vices, which by their very nature are such as to be directed to the end of a certain capital vice, are called its daughters. Now, the end of vainglory is the manifestation of one's own excellence as stated above, and to this end a man may tend in two ways. When he says as stated above, he's speaking about the fourth article, which we spoke about a few minutes ago. I skipped over that part where he explains that vainglory is geared towards a person's own excellence, which is why it's very closely related to pride and is actually the direct consequence of pride. But I skipped over that so as not to make this thing run too long. But it's an important bit of context, so you can go back and read it again for yourself. Moving on. In one way, directly, let me just read this whole sentence again, otherwise it won't make sense to me. Now, the end of vainglory is a manifestation of one's own excellence as stated above, and to this end a man may tend in two ways. In one way, directly, either by words, and this is boasting, which is one of the daughters of vainglory, or by deeds, and then, if they be true and call for astonishment, it is love of novelties, which men are wont to wonder at most, and if they be false, it is hypocrisy. Remember in the last episode, we were speaking about vainglory, and we said it's very prevalent on social media. I think if you want an example of this, what we mean by this, one of the daughters of vainglory is love of novelties. Whenever you see, influencers or people, just random people, not necessarily influencers, but guys just trying to do things which are weird and strange on social media, take a selfie on the edge of a cliff, or the weird stuff people do, and then sometimes they wind up dead. That's love of novelties. You're just trying to do stuff for shock value so that you can gain people's attention. That's what he means, love of novelties, doing stuff for shock value to gain people's attention. There's an entire film that's just about this, love of novelties, and that's The Prestige, written and directed by Chris Nolan. I think it stars Christian Bale and who's the dude who plays Wolverine? Hugh Jackman. Yeah. That film is all about this. Two magicians who are just like competing with each other to prove to each other. Maybe it was, I might have got the actors wrong. Anyway, look it up, The Prestige. It's about two magicians who are trying to outcompete each other in terms of getting people to be in awe and to wonder at the tricks that they perform. Very nice film. So he's covered there, daughters of vainglory, boasting, love of novelties, and hypocrisy, if they be false. If someone is like pretending to put forward stuff that, they want people to pay attention to, but it's all just, it's all just a lie. It's like, I don't know, Photoshop. That's hypocrisy. In another way, a man strives to make known his excellence by showing that he is not inferior to another, and this in 4 ways. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because now he's speaking about the stuff which we experience less online and more in our day-to-day lives. In another way, a man strives to make known his excellence by showing that he is not inferior to another, and this in 4 ways. That's deep. Remember, he said pride and its direct daughter vainglory has to do with an inordinate desire for one's excellence. One of the ways to desire one's excellence in a disordered way is to show that you are not inferior to anyone else. Now, which are the 4 ways in which you can show that you're not inferior to anyone else? First, as regards the intellect. So we say, in my mind, I am not inferior to anyone else. I am smarter than everyone else. First, as regards the intellect, and thus we have obstinacy, or stubbornness, by which a man is too much attached to his own opinion, being unwilling to believe that another is better. So you see how that's connected to vainglory. You don't want to accept that another's opinion is better, so you stubbornly stick to your own opinion, my way or the highway. Secondly, as regards the will, so what a person wants. And then we have discord, whereby a man is unwilling to give up his own will and agree with others. So it's like this person realizes that the idea that the opinion that the other person has is better than his own, but actually my way or the highway applies more to this than to stubbornness. And maybe the word stubbornness is just too generic, and maybe that's why St. Thomas doesn't use it, or maybe it didn't exist in Latin. I don't know. But this is a far more nuanced, subtle, and precise distinction: obstinacy and discord. Obstinacy has to do with the intellect being attached to our own opinion. Discord has to do with the will, where a man is unwilling to give up his own will and agree with others. Thirdly, as regards speech. And then we have contention, whereby a man quarrels noisily with another. Fourthly, as regards deeds, and this is disobedience, whereby a man refuses to carry out the command of his superiors. I found that enumeration brilliant from St. Thomas, just breaking down the different phases of vainglory. What are some practical takeaways? For starters, there's this idea of the importance of naming things. One cannot achieve mastery over something, over any creature, if one cannot name it. And this is most likely the part of the meaning behind the symbolism of what happened in the Garden of Eden when Adam had to name all the creatures, all the animals before he could gain mastery over them. There's a priest online named, you'll find a lot of his content online, called Father Chad Ripperger, and he's an exorcist. And one of the things he speaks about in exorcism is that it's usually quite important, or a key point in exorcisms is asking the demon what their name is and finding out their name. And most demons don't want to reveal their name because that gives the exorcist power over them. And in fact, our Lord did something similar. Remember, he asked that the man who was possessed amongst the Gadarenes, what is your name? And the demon said, my name is Legion. Anyway, the point is that naming things gives us power over them. And I remember, in fact, there's a story I once heard about an exorcist here in Pretoria who, some young people were, young people they're always very curious about exorcisms, right? So they're asking him a lot of questions about exorcism. And then he asked these young guys, do you know what the most common rite of exorcism is? And they didn't know. And he said, it's confession. Confession is the most common rite of exorcism. Food for thought, that in our life we face a lot of, we are challenged by the world, the flesh, and the devil. We face a lot of diabolical temptations when it comes to sin, and it's really important to be able to name things if we want to start to master them. So, knowing the difference between discord and quarreling, it's not a merely academic exercise. So, I don't know, imagine, let's say you're a married woman listening to this. There's that whole joke about women never ever apologizing. My experience, when I hear that joke, I do find myself nodding, I'm sorry to say. Anyway, moving right along, swiftly along. The point is, you could be in a relationship with your husband, and then, you never ever apologize. And maybe you go to confession or you're praying to God, asking him for pardon for your sins, and you pat yourself on the back because you say, I don't quarrel with my husband. I'm not like my neighbors. You never hear us raising our voices at each other. But guess what? The fact that you knew you were wrong in buying that thing which he told you not to buy and maxing out the credit card, and the fact that you will just not apologize despite knowing that you were wrong, that may not be contention, but that may be discord, and that may be a chilling of the relationship, and that may be a result of vainglory, which is a result of pride. And now that you know that it's discord and it may not be contention, and those are two different things, and both of them are like problematic, it gives you something at least with which to think about and to pay attention to, and to examine your conscience and to say, okay, maybe I'm not a noisy person, maybe I don't shout and raise my voice and throw things at people, but maybe I never ever apologize. And the reason I never ever apologize is because of vainglory, which is because of pride. And maybe now, because I can put a name to things, I can actually go to confession, or I can pray to God and ask him for pardon for very specific things which I didn't know I had before, because I didn't actually know that they exist or what the causes for those things were. So in terms of growth and self-mastery, it's vital that we be able to name the demons we have inside so that we can exorcise them. And knowing the difference between contention and discord and quarreling and stubbornness and obstinacy is not merely academic, but it's something very, very practical.